Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt here on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, KLUP, and also on talklawradio.com, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you can find me, podcasts, listen up. And if you have suggestions for the show, you can email me at host@talklawradio.com, HOST@talklawradio.com. Let me know what's on your mind, and maybe we'll talk about the legal issues that you're concerned about. But now we're going to talk about personal injury law and the trial between Terry Sanderson and Gwyneth Paltrow over a ski accident. Nathan, how would you categorize this type of case?
So I personally never handled a case like this before. Of course, there's not much skiing here in Texas, but in Utah, Colorado, there's a bunch of skiing. And so, of course, people have always wondered is, if I hit someone while I'm skiing, could I be sued for it? And what this case shows is that, yes, these cases do happen. Of course, Gwyneth Paltrow is a celebrity, and so more likely going to be sued than the average person. But another consideration would be if an average person hits the back of me and I break four of my ribs like Terry Sanderson, could I have a potential claim against the other skier? Of course, you can sue, apparently, in Utah if you are injured through the negligence of someone else while they are skiing. And just like if you're driving down a road and there is a car in front of you, if you don't timely apply your brakes, control your vehicle's speed, and rear end that car in front of you, you could be sued for a rear end car collision. That's exactly what was alleged by Terry Sanderson against Gwyneth Paltrow, is that he's skiing and then all of a sudden she's coming down the hill behind him. She's not paying attention. She's not controlling her speed, and she collides into the back of him. And I think what I read is that your homeowner's insurance could potentially be a source of recovery or a potential source of paying out for your negligence in a case like this.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I'd forgotten about that your homeowner's insurance can pay if you're negligent in some way. So this is negligence type case, right? And so
Exactly.
How do you define negligence?
So negligence, the legal terminology, it has these four elements, which would be duty, breach, causation, and harm. And typically what that means in just general talk is that, were you at fault for causing an injury? And by at fault, of course, it's easiest in a car accident situation. If you run a red light and cause a collision, then you were negligent. If you fail to yield the right of way and cause a collision, you're negligent. If you change lanes when unsafe and go into other driver's lane and cause a collision, you are negligent. And so pretty much negligence just means doing what an ordinary person would not have done.
Okay, let me give a public service announcement to the audience. Today we're talking about the optometrist who sued Gwyneth Paltrow, alleging she was not skiing as an ordinary, prudent person, that she negligently skied into him, causing him injury. If you're sued for crashing into the rear end of a motor vehicle in front of you, it will be under the legal theory of negligence, that is, for not driving like a ordinary, prudent person. If you act with ordinary prudence, God willing, hopefully, you'll avoid lawsuits based against you based on legal negligence. So we found the pleadings for Terry Sanderson and Gwyneth Paltrow. And so what happened after he filed suit?
So after Terry Sanderson filed suit, what eventually ended up happening is that Gwyneth Paltrow filed a counterclaim against him. And so there are situations where, not necessarily here, but in other cases where both sides could be suing each other over the same exact situation, and each side is blaming the other side for being negligent, for being responsible for causing the harm. And so, of course, Terry Sanderson, he sued Gwyneth Paltrow. Eventually, she turned around and sued him. And then the question before the jury was, who is at fault for causing the ski collision?
Angela, after you read these pleadings, what came to your mind? What was your first reaction after reading all the facts and allegations?
I definitely saw a difference between Gwyneth Paltrow and with Terry Sanderson. So his was more accusations, not really fact-based, whereas hers went through the medical record and determined, that he had previous diagnoses, he had issues with his vision. There was no validity to the traumatic brain injury. So definitely they did their due diligence, I would say, with looking through the medical record just to see, digging deep to see, okay, is there validity behind this? So definitely with the medical record, it's important to develop that baseline. So how were they prior to the accident versus how were they after the accident, like any medical records? And also, was there a impact, to their, was there a negative impact, to their living standards? And
Right.
so looking at taking all that into account.
Yeah. So Nathan, in a case where the medical evidence is important, can you just get all the medical records from the hospital, put it in a box, and put it in front of the judge or the jury, or is there a lot more to it than that?
So medical records in and of themselves are generally admissible as an exception to hearsay because it's a business record, so to speak. And so getting the medical records into evidence is pretty easy to do. The next question is, can you prove up any subsequent medical treatment that was performed and the reasonableness of the medical billing that was charged? And so it's more so proving up the treatment and the charge. That's the harder part, but getting the records themselves into evidence is pretty easy to do.
So if you were going to present all of this medical evidence with medical terminology and medical acronyms, it's probably not something that the general public would have an easy time understanding, though, right, Angela?
That's correct. You would definitely need to lean on an expert in that area. Somebody that has healthcare experience, registered nurses. Also, I know they lean on physicians as well in that area of expertise, just to be able to break it down, bring it down to layperson level, so that they can fully understand, or to the best of their ability, the medical aspects of the case, and then determine the best strategy for the case. Because if they don't understand the medical, then it's going to be a lot harder to determine that.
I've seen medical records with handwriting. Do they still do that? I mean, could they even read what was written?
It's challenging at times, definitely. But as nurses, we've gotten really good at trying to decipher doctors, orders, going through the orders and trying to decipher what they wrote. And so we have a lot more experience doing that.
So they have electronic medical records now, but do you still see handwriting?
I do.
Okay. All right. So in addition to the medical evidence, both sides had a long list of experts, right? And so what are some issues that trial attorneys have when bringing in experts?
So when it comes to experts for the plaintiff, you're going to want to bring one of the treating physicians. And so in the context of this case, it could be an emergency room physician that treated Mr. Sanderson at the hospital where they diagnosed him with 4 broken ribs and a concussion. Of course, you'd want to bring that expert to testify live before the jury just to explain exactly what are in those medical records to back up what Terry Sanderson was saying about the injuries he sustained immediately after the collision. And then you would also want to have, to counteract what the defense did here, is a biomechanical expert. And those experts are really effective before the jury. In this case, it was about who hit the back of the other person, right? Who collided into the back of the other person, because both sides were saying the complete opposite. Terry Sanderson said Gwyneth Paltrow collided into the back of him. Gwyneth Paltrow said, no, that's incorrect. Terry Sanderson collided into the back of me. And so they really got into the nitty gritty about, well, after the impact took place, what happened to your skis? What happened to your hands? How did you fall? And the biomedical experts got into that to either confirm or say no, that's actually inconsistent with what would have happened based on what the testimony was. And so those biomechanical experts, it looks like Gwyneth Paltrow's expert won that argument there. He was pretty effective. He was pretty persuasive. I listened to some of his testimony, and I saw why the jury really thought him to be credible.
Do these experts volunteer their time to do this, or do they have to be paid?
All experts are going to be paid if they testify at trial or do a deposition before trial. They're going to be paid one way or the other. The law looks at it from the standpoint of, especially if you retain the expert, then you're definitely going to have to pay for that expert's time. If it's a treating physician, you usually have to pay for the expert's time too. And so the experts are going to be compensated. And of course, both attorneys like to spend a lot of time talking about, well, how much are you being paid? Have you worked with this law firm before? How many other cases has you helped them with, to try to discredit the credibility of the expert?
Yeah, but it's common at the same time.
Yes, every case, the expert is going to be compensated as you would expect.
Yeah. And they had a long list, like you were saying, Angela, that every specialized type of doctor had to testify because Dr. Sanderson said that he had a concussion and that it changed his whole life. And so they both had a neurologist, and his neurologist said, yes, his life was changed, and the defense said, no, it wasn't. And so what was it about the trial testimony that weighed in favor of Gwyneth Paltrow on the issue of it negatively changed his life? What impressed you that thought, well, it doesn't really sound like it changed his life?
Well, I actually saw where they interviewed one of the jurors, and she said that based on the social media of all his trips, afterwards she was like, I don't really see a negative impact on his life. You know, he went ziplining and he did all kinds of stuff. And I've dealt with patients that have suffered a traumatic brain injury, and I've seen the negative impacts that it has in their life. It changed their behavior. You know, they were independent prior, and now they have to have supervision. So he didn't appear to have, a negative impact.
Yeah.
Like most of them do.
And what do you think, Nathan? What did you see there?
Yeah, so there was, of course, this dispute about the traumatic brain injury. And whenever that's in dispute, it's pretty hard for the other side to conclusively win it or disprove the other. There's a back and forth. Both sides can make pretty strong arguments about a traumatic brain injury. It's not that well defined. And so it's really difficult for one side to conclusively prove it or one side to conclusively disprove it. But what it looked like is that Gwyneth Paltrow's expert pretty much said that Mr. Sanderson's mental state had already been deteriorating, and that even if this incident hadn't happened, that this was consistent with the trajectory that would have otherwise have taken place. Of course, Mr. Sanders' expert said, no, he changed. This is how he's different. Memory, concentration, irritability, that all changed. That all became much worse. And just because you have problems beforehand, that doesn't mean that you can't be injured because of an incident, or things cannot be aggravated or made worse. You could have pre-existing conditions, but they can be made worse, and you can still recover for the part of it that's made worse.
Okay. So in law school, I learned that was the eggshell skull rule.
Exactly, eggshell plaintiff.
Well, there you go. We got to take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about how the jury would view all of this and how ultimately they get to weigh the evidence and come to a conclusion. And we'll talk about sinners and saints, and then we'll close out the show with legacy. So stay tuned.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.